We're going to start with segment 6C. It's our next installment in the integrated crop management process, and we're going to be focusing on insects. As our panelists, we have Ron Becker, Joe Kovach, and Rob Schleybaugh. And we'll be focusing on insect management, and I'll turn it over to Joe to begin. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to comment a little bit about what we heard in the earlier session about pesticide use. And this is kind of the filler, actually, till they start thinking. But when you think about pesticides, and if you're applying pesticides out in a field, it's being exposed to ultraviolet light, which breaks down the pesticide, and water. So you need those things to break down the pesticide. When we're under high tunnels, what are we blocking out? Water and ultraviolet light. So instead of your degradation curve going like this over time, it's staying up and up and up. So if you're using a field schedule of pesticides underneath your high tunnels, you're probably over applying, because they're not, those schedules are meant to be used where the material is broken down. The other point that I wanted to make is this issue about pesticides being absorbed by the skin of particularly apples. And that's been around. We know that's true, but if some of you have been around since the Allard controversy, that was an issue back in the late 80s as well. So there's nothing really new about certain crops absorbing the pesticides more than others. These things just cycle through over time. We get new compounds that show up and everybody goes bananas over it.
Speak up. Speak louder what you think you have.
Speak loud. I can yell louder than. Okay. This is on, right? Yep. All right. Whoa. So that was just kind of filler to try and get your attention back. Now I guess I could sit down. One of the things about trying to manage insects in high tunnels, and just any good IPM strategy you need to worry about. We talked a little bit about fertility in an earlier panel discussion. What happens with insects is insects follow the nitrogen. If you over-apply nitrogen, you're going to have healthier pests. You're going to have healthier predators as well, but it follows the nitrogen. So when you hear this, everybody says, oh, you have to have a healthy plant. Well, of course you have to have a healthy plant. You want to grow a lot of good leaves so you can produce good produce, or you want to grow a lot of good fruit. But if you over-apply the nitrogen, you're going to get mites, you're going to get aphids. I can guarantee you that. I did a study when I was in graduate school on peach trees. And I put peach trees in a house, in pots in greenhouses, and some I didn't fertilize at all, and I put mites on them. And then some I fertilized at the recommended rate, and then some I doubled the rate. You know, a little fertilizer is good, let's put on a little bit more. And you could see the difference in the mite populations within like 10 days. There was webbing all over all the trees that I over-fertilized. That's just an example. There's many examples in the literature. And even if you're using organic compost, and you're still applying too much nitrogen, you're facing an uphill battle. So I guess the bottom line is only use as much as you need, and that'll reduce some of your pest pressure. I talked a little bit, using compost, and there is various differences among compost. Some recent work out of Ohio State has shown that vermicompost, the compost that comes from worms, actually can suppress some insect pests, such as mites and aphids, those leaf-feeding type of pests. So if you're going to use compost and you find that you have problems with the typical greenhouse type of pests, you may want to consider incorporating vermicompost. It's more expensive, but again, you may get a pest benefit. When it comes to pollination, if you're talking about fruit crops, raspberries and things, when you look at flowers of any plant under UV light, it looks like a bullseye. When a bee comes flying by and sees a flower under UV light, there's a nice black center, and they're just like, that's where all the pollen and nectar is, and that's what they come into. Even though we see flowers as pretty, we don't see it like a target or a bullseye. Under hoop houses, you're blocking out some of that UV light. Not only you're reducing the potential of degradation of the pesticide, but you're confusing a lot of the insects. So in greenhouses and in high tunnels, when you put honeybees in there, they get stupid. They start running into the glass and they bounce around. Because they look at the UV light to get oriented and it's not there, so they do it. Whereas bumblebees, we can put them in greenhouses or glass houses, and they'll still be able to find, the flowers because they don't use UV light. They have receptors that look in the more visible light range that we do. So related to pests, when you think about it, if there's no UV light, maybe there won't be any insects in there, particularly flying insects. Because what? If you hang up a blacklight trap, what happens? It's UV light. And what do? You collect a lot of insects, correct? Those bug zappers, they're always, well, they're attracted to the UV light. So if you put this cover on, therefore you're not going to get a lot of regular pests, probably. The trouble is those bug zappers also wipe out a lot of beneficials. And so therefore we're not going to get any beneficials in those houses. If we release some beneficial organisms, are they going to act like honeybees or are they going to act like bumblebees? I don't know. Some will act like one and some will act like another. We do know that ladybugs are attracted to UV light, so they're UV light sensitive. So in a greenhouse situation, they may be more confused than out in the field. Parasitic wasps also respond to UV light, so they may be more confused under these high tunnels. Things such as lacewings also do come, but lacewings also look under green light and yellow light, because that's why we put yellow sticky cards up for some pests. So they'll be able to be, they should work fairly well under a high tunnel, one would think. And damsel bugs are a predatory bug that aren't UV light sensitive, so we would expect that type of insect to be beneficial and still work in there. We do know, like I said, that honeybees don't seem to function very well under these high tunnels, and Japanese beetles. The good thing is Japanese beetles don't seem to attack things. I was at a high tunnel, it was a fruit workers conference up at Cornell last week, and we went and visited some high tunnel raspberries and what they're doing up there. It's very good. But their Japanese beetle problems, raspberries are very attractive to Japanese beetles, and they had no problems with Japanese beetles in the high tunnel. So again, that's a benefit. Japanese beetles may perceive that as a black hole. They can't see in there. So it may be some positive or negative. So the question becomes, okay, if we don't have any UV light underneath there, that's good, but that means some of our leaf-feeding pests, such as aphids and mites, will probably be more of a problem. Thrips. We have some information in your packet on that Ron put together. But the question also becomes, and I'm just throwing this out that we may discuss later, should we put black lights in our hoop houses, our high tunnels? Should we put them in there to attract the insects? And are we going to attract more beneficials or more pests? I don't know. But we do know that it does disrupt UV light, and that makes it different than being out in the field. So our pest complex will shift. Okay.
I'm going to just step in here really quickly. I know that there were a number of people moving through the line when this panel took their seats, and Joe started to outline why it is that residues may persist in a high tunnel longer than they do in the field, and that's because the UV light isn't there to degrade them. So just as a matter of refresher, we have our next installment here in the Integrated Crop Management series, if you will. We're focusing on insect management, and we have 3 experts with us: Joe Kovach, Ohio State manager or director of the IPM program, Ron Becker with the IPM program, and Rob Schleybaugh from Millersburg. And obviously we're not going to leave design and construction and profitability and soil fertility and irrigation and disease management completely behind. But for the next half hour, we do want to focus on insects particularly. And this is obviously a different issue, if you will, because we have flying, crawling, jumping, hopping critters or not in the tunnels. And I guess I'll just turn to Ron now and ask, in all of the fields that you scout and the high tunnels that you see, and if you're not familiar with what Ron does, I'm going to ask him to start out with kind of give a thumbnail on that. In all the fields and the tunnels that you see, where would you rate insects as a problem, and what insects as a problem?
Okay, just as kind of a thumbnail as to what I do, for the last 25 years I've been scouting fields for the Ohio IPM program, and about 2 years ago Rob contacted me to see if I'd be interested in scouting their greenhouse/high tunnels. So that's where I got my start in doing that, and the experience is the best teacher. Is kind of a school of hard knocks, but it was a very good school. As far as what insects that I find mostly in the greenhouse, probably the top 2 are definitely, at least in what experience that I've had, the top 2 are aphids and whitefly. Now we've also had other ones. Spider mites have been ones that we've found in the greenhouses. What was kind of unique the year that we scouted Rob's house was grasshoppers had moved into the tomatoes, and they were doing quite a bit of damage. What was even more unique was that about 2 weeks after the grasshoppers were there, we started noticing a lot more spiders, and it was the yellow garden spiders moving in. So we did our best when we were scouting to avoid knocking down all those webs, although chances are even if we'd knocked them down, they'd put the webs back up pretty quick. But they just about controlled the problem in themselves. I mean, I was lucky that I had scouts that didn't mind spiders, but it was amazing the beneficials that moved in to take care of the problem at that point in time. As far as control, versus out in the field or inside, I guess I'd have to say, especially with whitefly, you're going to have more of a problem in a greenhouse or a high tunnel setting than what you would out in the field. I've seen whiteflies out in the field, but they're not contained. They don't have the protection that you have with a structure over top. So definitely the whiteflies aren't going to be as much of a problem. As far as the aphids go, again, and I think it has a little bit to do with what Joe was talking about as far as what beneficials are likely to be inside. There's times that we do have more problems with with the aphids in the high tunnels than what we would out in the field. Like I say, mites, thrips are another one that you're likely to have a problem with. One thing that I want to say is that it's very easy to scout for these insects. One thing that we do, and Joe mentioned it again, was putting up sticky cards, yellow sticky cards. That's a good way to help monitor for those whiteflies and even some of the other insects, the thrips and such, that might start coming in. But nothing's going to beat having a good 20-power hand lens and actually looking underneath the leaves of your plants. That's the best way to do it. Once or twice a week will give you a good idea as to what's happening. And whether you're growing organic or conventional, you need to know what's going on in there as soon as it happens. Especially if you're growing organic and you're going to make use of the beneficial releases, beneficial insect releases, which Rob did. And he was my teacher on that one. I'd helped some others do some beneficial mite releases, but Rob's had a lot more experience than what I have. But you have to know when the problem starts.
Joe, I'm going to turn to you first here, and then I definitely want to get Rob's input on this. But just as a general rule, is the high tunnel environment got a different population of insects in it, beneficials and not, than the field? I know that that's a kind of a broad brush question, but can you make any general comments about how the high tunnel populations will differ from a field? Maybe we can't yet, I don't know.
Well, I can't tell you in Ohio. The one thing we do know, and we've stated this many times, is the environment is different in a high tunnel than outside. Here, it's cloudy, outside it's rainy, inside it's California. Okay, so we have California type of pests, white flies, mites, and all these like hot, dry conditions, which is what a tunnel does. So if I were saying we're changing the climate, which is what we're doing, therefore our pest complex will change.
Okay. So Rob, do you have to, that suggests to me that you're approaching your field and your high tunnel management a little bit differently. Could you elaborate on if that's the case? And I know that Ron has referred to the beneficial releases. Tell us a little bit about those.
One of the things that is an advantage in high tunnels that we found out from the field is that, and we grow a lot of, mostly tomatoes for early, is that for one, you have already the tomato crop. Let's back up a little bit. If we rotate our houses and we don't have debris left over and former eggs and things in the greenhouse and do correct sanitation, we gain automatically by high tunnels in the next spring. Our crop is already a lot further on when the natural occurrence of insects outside are starting to develop because of the temperature and the southwesterly winds and so forth. So that immediately helps you to be at a great advantage of the crop. It is further advanced before you get insect infestation. But we still do have insect infestation at times in the greenhouse. Yes, we do grow. We do release beneficials at times. We've grown tomatoes 4 years that way in the high tunnels, and for 3 out of the 4 years we did release beneficials. The first year we did not have any problem, and the second year we had white flies, and I released beneficials, the Encarsia formosia, and I was very well satisfied with that. This year, for an example, I should have had Ron there for my pest scout. He was mentioning that he learned a lot, but we learned a lot by following him and identifying the pests and so forth and what the thresholds are. And I made the mistake of putting flowers on top hanging baskets in my tomato hothouse in February. And I think through that I got aphids, and that is another insect management thing that you try to avoid as much as you can. Like we heard of clean seed, that was for more of the fungal diseases. But also in bringing other plants in your greenhouse or high tunnels, you are getting more in danger of getting other insects in. We had a terrible infestation of aphids. And I decided to use some. I should say I'm organic. I'm 100% certified organic. And I tried the safer soaps, which you are probably most of you are acquainted with. Also, that didn't help enough. They were just growing, and so the next thing I did was go with Pyganic, which is an approved, is it Parithian type? And I still didn't get control of it. So I shouldn't have done this. Just to tell you my mistake, I should have released right away the beneficials for the aphids. And my experience is release enough right away. That's quite important. Don't just, try to knock them out with parasitical insects. And I was too late in the game. I had aphids all over the greenhouse that I didn't know what to do. But fortunately, I got an infestation of lacewings. One morning I walked in there and there were lacewings all over the place. And they literally cured my problem and was from natural. One of the things in the insect management is, and Ron told me that, is we have our greenhouses out in pasture settings. And the reason for that is, being as we're organic, we want to try to rotate, and we rotated one already. But we do cow grazing right around the greenhouses. And that's where the grasshopper problem came in. You don't have much grasshopper problems in your lawn, do you? We don't. I don't think anybody else does. Shortcut grass. So, see, here we're having grass up to 8-9 inches before we rotation graze, and this increases our grasshopper problem. We're still having that problem. And I just made out today that this is one of the things that we have to start mowing around our greenhouse instead of waiting for the cows to cut it down. I think that would help in our grasshopper reduction of grasshoppers. One of the other things that I think is very necessary is to have a healthy plant. And what Dr. Kovac here was saying of nitrogen, and I think it was you who recommended me that I called you. And that made a big difference.
All right.
Yeah. I had forgotten it was you I consulted with. I consulted different people on that problem, and as soon as I reduced the nitrogen thing, I noticed that the aphid population wasn't growing so fast anymore. And by the same time, I got the lacewings in there. And so those are the things that we have to work with.
Excellent insights. I'd like to ask one question of you, Rob. If you're committed to the release of beneficials, do you alter, I assume that they're used in conjunction with organically approved crop protectants, pesticides, insecticides. Are you adjusting what insecticides you use to account for the fact that you're also using beneficials?
Well, just to tell you the truth, many of the organic approved insecticides are very hard on the beneficials. So I think my conclusion was, at least from this year, and I'm just a farmer, my conclusion is you either try one or the other. And I'm more sold on the beneficials than I'm sold on the organic approved insecticidal inputs. And I don't think you can, I made the mistake of juggling them, and I was actually running them counter to each other.
So they were using them both, was at cross purposes, because they're so broad spectrum. Questions from the audience for the group on insect management? Yes.
It's kind of a crazy question. Every now and then, Jimmy Crocker's or Crockett or whatever his name is on PBS, and he's touting using some sprays that he makes up with tobacco juice and Tabasco sauce and stuff. Is that useful in keeping insects at bay?
Homemade remedies. Joe, Ron, Rob.
They usually don't work. But if you believe they work, and you don't, if in replicated trials, I've tried everything. I've tried cinnamon, garlic, different oils, tobacco. Well, tobacco is nicotine based, so nicotine is an insecticide. So that will probably work somewhat. But, generally these salad mixes that I call it, they don't work. Well, let me say this. They're better than nothing, but not much. Okay? So depends on what you really think.
Yes. Good supplier of beneficial insects.
I get some of them through Crop King, which is Medina County here, fairly local. The Whitefly and Carcia formosa, if I am correct in this, I think they come from overseas, and I get them through distributors one is called ITS from Colorado. They're fairly well accessible. There's different companies that have them, but they're produced. Some of them are produced outside the United States. I know that. You have to order them in advance. So it is very important when you see the first insects not to wait too long. It's a little different than when you spray with conventional pesticides out in the field. You do not have that potency knockdown thing, because the way the predator insects usually work is they lay their eggs into the egg of the pest. And so you see the cycle of control is a lot longer than when you go out with a toxic and you knock down. Am I right in that, Joe?
Yes. The other thing you'll have to remember is even professionals who work in biological control, we only succeed 15 to 20% of the time. And I'm about average. And it may be because some of the quality control, we're dealing with living organisms. So you may be ordering a vial of 5,000 parasitic wasp, and you're thinking you're putting out 5,000 per acre. Well, maybe there's only 2,000 in there when you actually count. Or there may be 5,000, but 3,000 are having a bad day. They've been shipped. It's cold, it's hot, it's dark. Things don't smell right. This is not normal where the sun angle is from where I was reared. So there's a lot of things we don't understand. And, I'm glad it worked. When biocontrol works, it usually works big time. When it fails, it fails big time as well. And it may just be how we apply it. We're not as smart as we think we are when it comes to biological control. So just be careful. You want to do the best of treating those living organisms. You don't want to just start shaking out predatory mites, and they're splatting on the leaves. So just be careful and realize that, but they do, it can be successful.
Is anybody else using beneficials? A few hands up. Okay. And your success, just as Joe said, 15 to 20%. Can you beat them, or do you beat them, or?
I have used them on whiteflies and tomatoes. Yeah, they work very well for me.
So we have one success story in the back. I saw some other hands. Anyone want to care to comment on your success rate? You said fungus gnats for whiteflies. Did I get that right?
Nematodes for...
You need use the nematodes for... Okay. You have not, or you have? Have not. Yes, Otho.
Yeah, I've used the Incarcia quite a bit, and it works great if you find 2 whiteflies and you use the Incarcia. If you find 10 whiteflies, it's too late.
So Rob's comment about go early and go hard is on target, right?
That's right.
Ted, same thing or different?
I used, we saw some mites, the spider mites, 2-spotted spider mites in raspberries this spring. And then I sort of got around to ordering the predatory mites from Hydro Gardens, this place that I don't know they have a nice catalog anyway, and reasonable prices. And we released them, and the mites were getting worse and worse, and then we released some more, and they worked. Lo and behold, they worked. So next spring I'll probably release them earlier. I didn't have to spray anything.
Going back to the original question as to where you can get the beneficial mites, if you're in Ohio here, if you look at the vegetable production guide, that's meant more for the field, but there's a page, couple pages in there that gives different sources for where you can get these beneficial insects.
Joe and Ron and Rob, could you give us a quick primer on the following question? Melanie indicated that white mold is equal opportunity disease. It just basically takes on just about anything, any dicot. What about some of the more prominent insects? Are these crop-specific problems, or are they will they attack most any crop that we might have in high tunnels? Just the big ones, I guess, if you will.
Yes. In entomology, anything.
The answer is yes. Okay. Thank you.
Really, with insects, we have a saying, anything can happen and usually does. So there are species-specific insects, there are generalists, there are actually Ohio, even in Wooster, we're right at this intersection. Not only do we have cloudy days, but we get pests from the Northeast, we get pests from the Midwest, and we get pests from the Southeast. And they all kind of meet within about a 20-mile area where you're standing. So as an entomologist, I can understand where the pests are in Maine, because we've had them, or Tennessee, or Nebraska. And so we got them. Whatever you want, we got it. We may not have as many or many generations as some of the southern pests. We have more generation than the northern pests, but we got them. And that's why I have a job.
To follow up with that is, it's like he says, most of the general pests that we've talked about, the aphids, thrips, mites, they're going to be more generalists. They're going to feed on a lot of different crops. Tomato hornworm is one that you're going to see it both places. We've tended to see it a little bit more often in the high tunnels, and whether that's because we don't have the funguses working on them in there, or we don't have the birds coming down and feeding on them, whatever the case may be, but that's one that we've tended to see just a little bit more in the high tunnels than we have in the field. The other thing to be aware with the hornworms, especially if you're going to be growing tomatoes year after year, is the adults, or the pupa stage, I should say, of that is in the soil. My one scout this year, she brought me this huge cocoon that they dug up from their garden about 1 inch, 2 inches deep. And that's what it was. It was from the hornworm adult. So just be aware that is one that will overwinter in that area.
So we can expect Rob, we can expect infestations earlier if the crop is there in the high tunnel or not? Did I catch you right earlier when you said that?
No, not necessarily. What I was saying is most now, like in a soil that, like you were talking of the hornworm, that would possibly be so. We do have every year a mild problem of hornworms in there. We spray with dipel, a BT, which is very effective so far. But what I was saying is your crop is further advanced when the outside temperatures are cooler. When they hatch. The insects hatch in the outside. So your crop is further advanced, and you already are a step ahead of the regular field crops in the insect problems.
Other questions from the audience about insects? Creepy, crawly, jumpy. Organic control for flea beetles. There's a grown up front. Oh my gosh. Anyone from the panel, or do we want to let Scott?
Go ahead.
Scott. Neem oil. Question is no, or the experience has been no good, right? Neem oil, pyrethrum, nothing touched them. Ted?
And some people, if you don't let the things get under the row cover, then floating row cover might be helpful.
Floating row cover, a cultural manipulation. Everyone knows what a floating row cover is. Wire, thin wire band, usually over the top of a raised bed, spun bond, agribond, or other cloth that just basically shades and covers the crop, and it won't allow some of the pests to get underneath it. Am I right on that?
That's correct. And we have a limited, with organic, obviously we have a limited arsenal of tools that you can use. And if you've run through neem and pyganic, and I think you're pretty, I mean, BT wouldn't work. You pretty much are toast. Yeah, row covers will act as an exclusion if they're coming from outside.
If you use a real one with a lot of space so it can push, the plant can push it up, or you hoop it and give room for it to grow.
Just in case you didn't hear that, the flea beetles were worse on daikon radish, did you say?
Yeah, in fact,
And eggplant, right?
I looked it up, and one of the controls for flea beetles, it says the plant is sacrificial crop of daikon Chinese radishes. And that's what my thought was.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, you know,
go ahead.
but just really, as an organic grower, you're going to always be fighting an uphill battle. So what I would say is don't plant those. Plant something else. I mean, really, you're battling nature. So what you have to do is try and find crops that are less pest susceptible.
The one partial solution was a floating row cover high over the top. I know there have been a couple of hands. Go ahead.
One other thing is.
Wait, one sec. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm an organic grower, and I grow eggplant. And people are always amazed that I can grow eggplant. Well, I can tell them something said about the whitefly. I look for those flea beetles, and as soon as I see one, I hit it with organic. And that's what it takes. I think if I wait until I see 20 of them, there's a million of them, and it's too late. I have to spray so much organic to kill every insect per mile. Now,
So
timing.
timing is key. So if you didn't hear that, organic grower, eggplant, scouting seemed to be the main issue there. Finds one flea beetle, hits it with pyganic, right? And so the key elements that I heard were scout it, so identify it, and then use your threshold, which is low at 1, and go right away. So timing was key. Did I get that right?
Timing, yeah.
Okay. There was another hand somewhere here. Yeah.
Another is timing. I only grow arugula in the fall because flea beetles are not active late in the fall.
So switch your sequence of crops, if you will, to get away from when the insects might be around. Yes.
One thing we found beneficial for eggplant and flea beetle, burn your dead stalks.
Burn.
That I think that the flea beetle, the eggs or something is laid in the stalks and we burn those.
Where do the flea beetle infestations come from?
Well, the problem is with flea beetle is it's not just going to be on that one. I mean, we have various types of flea beetles. You've got the corn flea beetle. You've got ones that are going to get into the cabbage, and they're not just in your greenhouse or your high tunnel. So one other thing that you may want to consider, and it depends a lot on the insect that you're trying to screen out, and you'd have to get a fairly small mesh to do it, but there is the option of putting screen on the that lower portion of your high tunnel where you're going to be opening up the plastic. One problem is that it's going to be cutting down some of the flow, the airflow, so you're not going to get quite as much as what you'd want. But for some crops that don't need quite as much airflow, or you're going to have the vents in the roof, then maybe that's an option, is putting screening in there that's going to keep those smaller insects out. It's not going to do anything for mites. It's not going to do anything for thrips. But when you're looking at possibly the flea beetles or definitely grasshoppers, screening or a barrier of some sort is something that you can go with.